Welcome to the first installment of Track by Track. I'm your host, Meltdown. I got this idea quite a while ago while listening to another podcast where two guys sitting around in their mother's basement talking about albums and each individual track and speculating on what the artists could have been thinking or how it was written. I thought to myself, why not just ask the artists themselves? That's where Brent Smith from Shinedown comes in. He was cool enough to be my first guest and talk about their debut record, Leave a Whisper. Of course, this record came out back in May of 2003 and turns 20 this coming spring. Brent Smith and Kerch are still in the band. Of course, former bass player Brad Stewart and former guitar player Jasin Todd also helped out in the making of Leave a Whisper. We talk about every single song in depth. Why'd they cover a Skynyrd song? Talk about 45. Fly from the Inside, Burning Bright, 4 songs that made it in the top 5 of the Billboard charts, and an album that sold over 1 million copies and really catapulted the career of Shinedown. So enough about me telling you about the background story of Shinedown. I'll let Brent Smith do it today on Track by Track.
This is Track by Track, a deeper look at some of rock's biggest albums from the artists who wrote them, track by track. And now, with today's album, here's your host, Meltdown.
And there he is, Brent Smith. How you doing, my friend?
I'm hanging out with you, so I'm doing good, brother.
All right, I appreciate that. A lot of things happening this year for you guys. I saw, as we record this right now, Dead Don't Die. You guys just shot the video for that. Just put that out. Planet Zero, I saw the tour back here in September. It was outstanding. So what you got going on for 2023?
Well, we just announced a tour with our really, really good friends, 3 Days Grace and From Ashes to New. And this has actually been it's been a work in progress for some time with us in 3 days, because some people may not know this, but the two of us, meaning the two bands, we actually hold the most number ones on the Billboard mainstream rock charts of the 39-year history of the chart. So you know, the two of us were like, when are we going to do a tour where it's just, I think combined we have 41 number one songs between the two bands, which is crazy. But that's what we're the most excited about. Obviously, Dead Don't Die. The video is out. We're getting ready to release another song and another video here momentarily. But the biggest thing is the tour starting April 3rd, going to May 9th. Actually starts in Saginaw, Michigan. That's right. Which we're stoked about.
Yeah, road trip. I'm going to take a road trip up there and check that show out for sure.
Yeah, man. There's a lot of stuff going on, but the announce of the tour, and that's been the biggest part so far.
Now, real fast, not to get off on different things here. I was thinking about this last night on the way home. Are you guys doing any festivals this year, or do you guys kind of just like some years do festivals and some years kind of do your own thing?
It just depends on the album cycle, and it depends on the radius of what part of the country and what part of the world we're in. Like in America, they want you to be, I think it's 120 days out from when you played within 150 mile radius. So to answer your questions, we do have some stuff that's not announced yet in the United States, and we've got something pretty enormous that will be announced in a few more months. That is the back half of this year, into the holidays of 2023. But it just depends on the cycle. Sometimes, we've known Danny Wimmer for a long, long time in all of his festivals, and he's fantastic with how he does things. But there's so many festivals now where you can pretty much get on at least a few of them per summer because you can flip-flop. But for us, we're also pretty strategic with how we do these festivals, because ultimately we want to be able to headline, but it's a balance more than anything.
I'm just glad I'm not one of those people trying to figure out the geography and the days and the it seems like a pretty hard job.
Yeah. I'll give a bit of a name drop here. Ron Opaleski with William Morris. He's been our agent forever. He does Canada and North America. And it's honestly, it is a bit of a science.
Yeah, I
bet. Neil Warnock does our international. There's a lot of people involved in putting that routing together, because you're dealing with not only for us in America, our staff on the road now is roughly about 77 people. And so there's a lot of logistics.
Yeah, no question. Well, Brian, thanks so much for joining us here today. The show is called Track by Track. We're going to go track by track over some of the biggest records from some of the bands, and we're going to take you back to 20 years. It was May 27th of 2003 when Leave a Whisper dropped, and I'll never forget seeing you guys for the first time here in Detroit with Brad and Jasin. But first, before we do that, go back and tell everybody this record didn't just come together willy-nilly, did it? It took a while, didn't it?
It took a lifetime. I remember my good friend Brad Arnold from Three Doors Down, because he was a huge part of the beginning of the touring of this band going back 20 years ago. Three Doors Down was the first band that really took us on a proper tour where we were out for like months at a time. And he said, you're going to get your whole life to do your first record, and you're going to get 6 months to do your next one.
That's right.
And he was 100% right. It was a life's journey at that point in time. You know, I'm 20 something years old, I think I was 23, 24 years old when the record came out.
Now you were in a band called Dreve, right? In the 90s. And then the record company, they liked you, but they weren't crazy about the band. Is that how, am I reading that right?
Well, what it was that they were trying to figure out if I'm being honest, if we were capable of writing songs. Like what, and we demoed for 10 months. And, you know, sometimes when you're in a band, it is one of those elements where I think of a band like Rage Against the Machine. Those guys get into a room, and from the day they probably met each other, it just was something where when they got in the room, it was just crazy energy. And that's how a lot of the songs were created. Mm-hmm. And then you have some bands where some members of the band will go and they're meticulous about the songwriting and they scrutinize over everything. And it's really about the melody, the lyric, and there's a lot of time put into that. And then you go to the band and the other components and build the songs around that. A good example of that would be Lennon and McCartney from the Beatles.
Never heard of them, but I'll take your word for it. Okay.
Right. You know, some dudes from Birmingham. But for what was happening with us, we were signed. This is the first band on Atlantic, signed out of Knoxville, Tennessee, signed by Steve Robertson with Atlantic Records, which, by the way, 21 years later is still the A&R for the band, which is an anomaly, and still on Atlantic Records, which is an anomaly. But it was all about artist development. And a lot of that had to do, I mean, ultimately, Craig Cowman from Atlantic had a huge part in this, and so did Steve-O, and so did Bill McGathey, the manager of the band. But yes, in answer to the question, the reality was the band got signed to demo, and then 10 months of demoing just was not there. But about 2 months before the band was dropped, Steve-O sent me to Los Angeles for the very first time. It was the first time I'd ever been on a plane, all of that. And he sent me out there to work with these two really, at the time, and still are, very prolific songwriters, Tommy Sims and a gentleman by the name of John Shanks. These guys are, I mean, as far as songwriting is concerned, there's a lot of songs that people know that these guys have written. Anyhow, getting me in the room, because what they were trying to figure out is if we put him in a room with songwriters, will he contribute? Is there a mechanism there that we're not seeing with this band that he's in? Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly what they did. And I went out there, I wrote, I think it was 6 songs between the two of those gentlemen. And then he had me go and work with Desmond Child, which was a pretty wild experience. And then I wrote with a couple other people, and then I came back, and then they were assessing these demos with these other writers, and the band was dropped. And then 2 weeks later, I remember I was making a decision whether I was going to go to New York or Los Angeles. And this was during the holidays when we got dropped. And 2 weeks after we were dropped, Steve called me back. He called me and he said, I want to re-sign you. And I go, well, he goes, I want to sign you. And I said, I'm confused. You just dropped us. He's like, well, I want to sign you. And so I had no idea what an artist development deal was. And this was something that was created by Ahmet Ertegun, which was the founder of Atlantic Records, God rest his soul. Yeah. But Ahmet was all about the development of the artist. And he was always about, don't put a clock on an artist. Like, let them have time to evolve. Let's help them hone in their craft. But long story short, I re-signed, and it took me on a 3-year journey. And then Leave a Whisper was released.
Yeah, 3 years. I mean, that is this short of it, for sure. So you, if I'm not mistaken, it was you, Brad, and Jasin. Brad Stewart and Jasin Todd went out on tour. Now, tell everybody what this tour was called, where you went from radio station to radio station.
So it was a promotion tour. And what we were doing was, the record was done, and the first single, Fly from the Inside, which, by the way, you were one of the very first people in North America to play Fly from the Inside. Oh, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think you were I know the station was one of the first top 5 stations in America to play the first single. So thank you for that. Yeah. But so instead of, like, the song was starting to percolate on radio, and the label said, we want you guys to go out, and you're going to fly to different places, but ultimately the flights were going to cost too much money. So they said, you're going to drive everywhere. So me and Jasin and Brad got in a Buick,
a brown one.
I'm not even joking. And you were there.
Yeah, I was.
We got in this brown Buick, and we just hit the road. And when I say we went to every single radio station in North America, I'm not joking. Aside from Alaska and Hawaii, we went to every single state in North America, multiple radio stations. Because also, too, in 2000, early 2003, I think in North America, there was close to, I think it was roughly almost 300 rock stations at that time. I think there's 90 now. And some of them are they're a combination of alternative and active, and then there's mainstream, and then there's pure active rock. And then there's mainstream rocks. But at that time, rock radio, like modern rock radio, there was about 300 stations. We hit every single one of them. We would just go into radio stations and introduce ourselves, and we would play live in the station, and we would do all these different, acoustic lounges and what have you. And then we would go out that night and hang out with everybody. And you're young, you're 23, 24 years old. So the recovery was a little easier the next morning. But it was, we were hustling it. We were out there doing it for real, man.
It was called the Shit Brown Buick Tour.
It was. It was.
Well, all right, you mentioned Fly from the Inside. That was the first song I ever played. That was the first song I heard from you guys. That's how Leave a Whisper opens up. What are your recollections about writing that song?
I remember that Bob Marlette, who was the producer on that song, I remember that the day I went in to do the vocals for it, we had kind of the lyrics and the melody was kind of flushed out, but he had gotten the band to put the song together the way we all heard it. I was still working on the lyrics at the time, because what we did is we had the group of songs that we were going to record. We did we did 2 weeks of pre-production with Bob too, before he even put us in the studio, which was very smart. And he was amazing. He was great with debut bands. He was great with like beginning bands. He knew how to be patient and really work through what was going on, because there's so many things going on when you're brand new and it's exciting and everything. So honing that in, he was great at that. And so by the time we got to the vocal sessions and we had all the music beds done, because he did want to do that. He was like, let's get all the music first, and then I'm going to do Brent in the end. And I think Jasin had a couple of guitar parts. Jasin stayed a little bit longer out in LA while I was doing vocals. But Fly from the Inside was the first song we did. First vocal song that we did. And I remember the first day, the beginning of the song, where the riff comes in and it's, here's the weight of the world on my shoulders. Here's the weight of the world on my shoulders. The yell, where it's like on my show, that part, the first day was all just that. Was trying to, because we didn't know that that's what it was going to be like. So we were trying out all these different variations. We had the part where it was, here's the weight of the world on my shoulders twice. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, and then we got to have something huge coming into this. So it was like a combination of me trying out just all different kinds of things and like singing and yelling and screaming and doing all these different variations and what have you. And because I wasn't necessarily trained at the time and what have you, I blew my voice out, just on that one thing. So I had to wait like another 4 days for my voice to come back. Once again, I was young, I didn't have any training or anything like that. Obviously I know how to do it way better now. But at the time you're young, you're impressionable, you're excited. But that's what I remember the most was getting that scream, that yell. And that first day we just kept doing it over and over and over. And it was never the same take. It was always like a different take until we landed on something.
And then it goes into Left Out, which you wrote with Brad and Jasin. As far as the writing credits on this record, I think that's the first one you guys kind of wrote together. What do you remember about that song?
That was something that we just, we worked it out with a producer, songwriting partner of the band, who was a huge part of the DNA of this band, which is a gentleman by the name of Tony Battaglia. And
he's
Tony,
he helped you guys out a lot with this record. Yeah.
Massive. That 3-year journey, I would say a good year and a half of that 3-year journey was working with Tony, and then the band working with Tony. And as far as the song, he was by far on Leave a Whisper. Tony Battaglia was the essential songwriting teacher to all of us on that album. He was extraordinary. Very, very lucky to have found him. But Left Out was something that we were just kicking around, and we would work on it, and it had a good groove to it, and Tony did a demo on it and what have you. And I just remember Bob being like, this will be he said, it's not a single, but it's a great, and it's not necessarily even, I don't want to disrespect it and call it an album track, but it's going to be a great song for you live. Yeah. It's going to be like a big energy live. And he wasn't wrong. But he was like, but it's got to sound a certain way on the record. And it was way more raw when we would do it live. But I love the recorded version of it. I mean, that's why it's on the album. But that's what I remember the most about Left Out was we were always structuring that song with the intent that this is going to be a big crowd song. This is going to be a song where it's really going to lift the momentum of the show when it comes in. And for a long time, man, it was the jump song. It was the song that got everybody like bouncing.
And then we go into the third track, Lost in the Crowd, which is like, it's a little bit slower, but you also bring in Rick Beato, which is super interesting because for people that don't know him, that guy, he's unbelievable, isn't he?
He's extraordinary. I say extraordinary, amazing, profound. On that first record, man, when I think about it, we had a lot of just incredible people that worked on that album. But yeah, Rick Beato wrote the song with him. He has the production on the song. And if people don't know this about Rick Beato, he's now he is considered an influencer and really a YouTuber. But if you don't know who he is, theorist, right? Is that what? Yeah, absolutely. And he has just look him up, Rick Beato on YouTube. I mean, you talk about going down a rabbit hole. He's amazing.
No doubt.
But he actually has a segment about this song on his YouTube channel because I was living Judy Van Zant, who was a big part of the band's beginnings as well. In Jacksonville, Florida, I had run out of money while I was demoing in Jacksonville and what have you. And I didn't have any money at the time. I'd kind of gone through all the record advances and things of that nature. And
people know she's part of the Leonard Skinner family.
She is. Yeah. She was Ronnie Van Zant's widow.
Okay.
And She is a huge part of the DNA of this band as well. A
Well, we'll get
massive
to that,
part.
yeah, coming up. Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Lost in the Crowd, I mean, what a great song that is. Just, I mean, like I said,
But the
such
reason
a build up and the whole thing.
the reason I bring that up is because she housed me rent free for like a year. And so Rick came down to that place, and it like there was no furniture or anything in this place. It was just, I had a garbage bag of my stuff and a TV on the floor. And Rick talks about this, and he comes in, and essentially he drove down there from Atlanta. He comes in, he's got an acoustic guitar, and he goes, "Let's just mess around." And I said, "Sure." He's like, "You got anything?" I'm like, "Not really." I'm like, "Do you have anything?" And he just starts playing this thing. And just through stream of consciousness, the song was written in about, I think we wrote the song in close to like an hour and a half, and it was done.
Wow. It's one of the highlights on the record. One a song I thought could have actually been a single, personally.
It actually was supposed to be a single. We just kind of ran. One of the things that happened, we'll get to here in a minute, was one of the things that occurred was nobody knew that the Simple Man, no one knew that the moment was going to happen when it kind of changed the course a year into the record when that happened, and it kind of changed the course of the record.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving on here, we got a No More Love. Also, Bob Marlette, Jasin helped you that, Tony as well. What do you remember about that song?
I just remember the interesting thing about that particular song was Jasin had a lot of influence in that one musically. And what I remember is I lived at a Comfort Inn in Jacksonville Beach for like 8 months. And, some people would be like, well, that must have been awesome. It was kind of a seedy hotel. It was on the beach. So what was cool was I was able to, every single morning, I will never take it for granted, I was able to look out at the Atlantic Ocean every morning, which was cool. But he was in my hotel room, and this was kind of early when I met him. And it was one of the first things that me and Jasin ever wrote together. And we wrote it in that hotel room. And I just remember one thing was this drone that he had. And it was the very first time that I had seen a baritone guitar. He had like this little amp that he brought, and he brought an acoustic with him, but he brought this guitar in with him. And, some people at that time too, 7 strings were a big deal, down tuning, like Corn, Biscuit, all that kind of stuff. Like it was really down tuned. He brought in a baritone guitar, something that I had not really ever seen before. And I remember we're kind of playing on the acoustic, and he's kind of showing me this riff. And I said, play it on that guitar and on the baritone. And when he played it on the baritone, it kind of changed the tonality of what the song was. And it gave it this really dark, impeding kind of feeling that I hadn't heard before. And that's what I remember the most about it, was just the sound of that baritone guitar, which gives it the sound that it has on the record.
Yeah, and this song really, I mean, a lot of these songs show off your vocal prowess, but I thought this one really did.
Yeah, there's like 3 characters in that song. There's like 3 versions of me in that song. So it was fun to write, man. I remember also too in the studio, that was super fun to I had kind of my footing at that point with that song with Marlette, and we were kind of rolling. So like I remember going in and doing No More Love, and we had a blast doing the vocals on that. Yeah.
Did that take a lot of takes too?
Not really.
No.
Not really. Yeah. Bob was never about like over, like, one of the reasons why Leave a Whisper as a debut album, it sounds so full and it sounds so rich and has that analog, like that warmth, but it also has that high end. This is essentially when the record was mixed. It was probably the back half of 2002, but Andy Wallace mixed all of Bob Marlette's songs that he produced on the record. And so Bob was always really focused on, we had an idea that Andy was going to do the mixes on it. But Bob was never like, I'm not going to stack you crazy. He said, we're going to harmonize some stuff. We're going to do some ad libs here. And the other thing cool about Bob was everybody was on Pro Tools. everyone. And he was one of the only producers in Los Angeles that worked on Logic.
Is that
So
right?
it was a totally different program.
Yeah.
I think that honestly, man, those Bob Marlette songs, the reason they have a very original tone to them and a very unique sound is because he recorded it analog, drums and bass at Henson Studio. So all that was to 2-inch tape. And then he did everything on Logic instead of Pro Tools. I think that's what kind of gave it its character.
Well, another track that he's got writing credits with as well is a better version that you wrote with. It says here, Brad Stewart. Now, was this song? I don't know. Is this a little bit autobiographical or no?
Yeah, it totally was. I mean, my favorite lyric in that song is, "I am not perfect and I don't claim to be. And if that's what you wanted, well, then I'm so sorry." And I always thought that was kind of tongue in cheek and a bit clever. That was a difficult song to do. Because Bob had a cadence that he wanted me to do on that song, like in the choruses, because I remember being in the studio, and when I first started to do the chorus, Bob was like, stop, wait a minute. Because what was happening was it sounded like back in the day, Little League, when you were at a baseball game and they'd be like, hey, batter, batter, hey, batter, batter, swing. Hey, batter, 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 swing. And Better Version was like, how about a better version of the way that I am? How about it? And I was like, it sounded like I was saying, hey, batter, batter. And he was like, no. It has to be, how about a better version? And there was so much enunciation that I had to do. And this is the very first time that he talked to me about when you're doing vocals, the smile. So what people may not understand, there are certain vowels, consonants in the English language, where when you're in a studio and you're singing certain things with a cadence and a rhyme pattern and what have you, if you don't enunciate the word very specifically, you can't understand what it is. And that was one of those songs. It's just where it fell in its cadence. I had to be really, really on the cadence of the song and the enunciation of the song. So I just remember being in front of that microphone, like, how about a better version? Like, I had to really, it took me a while to get it. That was a long vocal process, but I think the song sounds cool.
I think it's an awesome song. Yeah. You don't want to end up on one of those videos like misheard lyrics like you hear all the time.
Right.
Yeah, like Yellow Ledbetter from Pearl Jam. I still don't know what they're saying on that song. But then
even the lyrics that are actually there, I don't know I don't have no idea what it actually means. And I've read them before.
I know, it's crazy. We go into your next song, song number 6, Burning Bright. This was a song that became a single as well. You guys played this for many years. Tell me about that one.
Man, this was a really emotional one because something I don't talk about a lot, but everybody knows how much I love my granny and, my hometown and what have you. So my granny is my mother's mother, but my grandmother, my father's mother, her name was Jessie. And while I was demoing for what would become Leave a Whisper, I was in Jacksonville and kind of early stages of the demoing process and what have you. My mother called me and I said, hey, what's up? And she goes, I need to tell you something. And I need you to, she goes, where are you? I'm like, I'm at the hotel. And she goes, okay, I need you to sit down. And I sat down and she told me that my grandmother had been killed in a car crash. And it was, to say that it was devastating would be an understatement. It was one of the worst days of my life. And by far one of the worst days of my life. So I flew home and we put my grandmother to rest. And I came back and I was really not in a good headspace when I came back. And it was the first time that I had really experienced in my family. It was the first time I experienced death to someone that I was so close to, and who was a huge part in raising me. And I wrote Burning Bright about her.
Wow,
You know?
that's the hair on my arms just stand up, man. That's an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
In Memory is next. I was going to ask you if that's about anyone in particular.
In Memory was one of the last songs that was not only written and recorded for the record. This was also a song with Rick Beato. Rick Beato also has the writing credit on it as well with me.
Yeah.
And you know, I remember that you have to kind of put this into perspective. This is towards this 3-year journey, like the end, like right before we're in the midst of, we had already recorded everything with Bob Marlette in Los Angeles. We had been working with Tony for over a year and a half. And now Atlantic brought this man in, this other individual in named Rick Beato, but me and Rick Beato were having this momentum, and he was having momentum with us as a band. So we were continuously working on songs and the structure of this record. If you break it down, Leave a Whisper has 3 producers, ultimately 3 mixers, and you know, you're working with different songwriters and what have you. But I remember that In Memory was also a point with me where I was so tired of writing songs. Like I was like kind of over it at that point. I'd written so many songs and been all over the place, but the label was like, we need a couple more, because the last songs that were written for the record were this one, In Memory, and Stranger Inside. And so those were the last ones. And I just remember, if you listen to In Memory and you really listen to Stranger Inside, which I know we'll get to, but there is an attitude on those songs that's kind of different than the other songs. And it was just like, I have to will these songs to be what I need to finally get this record to be released, to have it done, to have it, because we weren't even in the process yet of, you know, taking photos for anything. We hadn't figured out the album cover. We were in the midst of looking at album covers while I was doing vocals for that song. And so I just remember that one in particular, I was on a tear. I just wanted to get it done. But there's also in that song one of my favorite lyrics that I've ever come up with, which was some of the ugliest things took the longest time to make, and some of the easiest habits are the hardest ones to break.
Yeah.
So yeah. I always dug that lyric.
Yeah, and you've lived that over the years, right?
You can't, you know, for me and you have known each other for 2 decades, and I can't necessarily pull it out of thin air, man. I have to live through it.
That's right. All I Ever Wanted comes up next, a heavy, riffy song. What do you remember about that track?
I remember that came in, that was by Brad. He's one of the main writers on that song. I remember we had a lot of fun recording that one. And that was also with Rick Beato. We recorded that in Atlanta at Tree Studios. And I just remember that Rick was like kind of the same thing with Bob, where he said, it's not necessarily going to be a single, but I think that this song, this is Rick talking. He goes, I think this song will button the record up really well. I think it'll kind of give it, because we had 10 songs and everybody was pretty cool at that time. But Steve came in and was like, we need a couple more. We need 2 more. And again, this was one of the last songs that was written for the record. But what I remember was this was probably one of the first moments in the studio vocally where I recall Rick turning around and looking at me, because at the end of that song, if you listen to it, I just go for it at the end of it. And I'm singing as hard and as high as I can go. And I just giving it everything that I have. I remember Rick turned around, looked at me, was like, what's wrong with you? You bringing a shovel to the studio when you do vocals? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's just like, how are you going to do this live? And, you know, I'm like, I'll just figure it out. You know, you just got to do it. You know what I mean? But I remember that was the first time that I heard the term, like, do you just bring a shovel every time you come to do vocals? You're just digging yourself a hole, you know, like it was all that's what I remember from that and that it was a lighthearted session. Like once we had that song, it wasn't super stressful.
Yeah. And then that goes into Stranger Inside, also help with Rick there. And that's like just prolific Shinedown as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but there's a, what's interesting. I listened to this record for the first time front to back, and I'm not even joking, probably in over a decade. Just recently, when I was coming back from the UK from last year, when the end of last year, we were doing headline shows over in the UK, and on the plane ride back, I listened to this record like front to back. I hadn't done that in forever. And obviously because we're finishing out last year, I knew that this year was the 20-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. And when it got to that song, it completely transported me back to Atlanta once again at Tree Studios. Here's the unique thing. This is Rick Beato. And I wrote this song with Rick Beato as well. And so they had 4 different studios in Tree. Rick had kind of carte blanche at the time to any studio that he wanted, but they had brought in this, like, it wasn't a makeshift vocal booth, but it was like you walked into this one studio, I think it was Studio B, and it was like this white box and almost kind of looked like a pod. You know what I mean? When people are moving and stuff like that, it's kind of like what it looked like. Had a window in it, and it had, I remember the walls were like 2 feet thick in it, and it was all soundproof. So it was constructed a certain way to make the room like super dead. They would do like drums in there, and when they needed to isolate stuff, like really like that had no decay and they could control the sound. And so I remember that session, that vocal session, walking in, and it was probably like, I didn't start that particular song. I started the vocals at midnight. I remember that. And it went to about 6 a.m. because we did all the vocals and then we comped everything together. And then I did all the harmony. Like we did the whole thing in like 6 hours. And what I recall, and the tonality of my voice in that song specifically had a lot to do with that box. Like Rick called it the hot box. And so sorry. He didn't call it the hot box. He called it the hot box because meaning vocals.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you walked in, it was, if you were claustrophobic, it would be a little funky for you because the sound is deadened and then you have your headphones on, and the mix sounded great and everything like that. But like if you were to take the headphones off and kind of like breathe in, the oxygen was very like non-existent in there. And so what would happen is, anybody that knows me, like I look like I've jumped in a swimming pool after the 3rd song when we're playing live. So I put everything into it. So I start singing this song, and he wants me to start kind of, build up to it. So we do the verses first and the pre-chorus, and then we go to the chorus. When we got to the choruses in that song, I was down to my underwear and I was drenched, and I was in there, but it had so much humidity in that box that it completely opened everything up, and I could just hit any note I went for. And like there was just a different kind of and he did it on purpose.
That's like a vocal trick, it sounds like.
Yeah, because you're so open and you have so much moisture in the room, and it's just, anytime you're in a humidity area, people talk about like, I'm sweating, this is awful, I hate it. I love it.
Yeah.
Because everything is open, and for a vocalist anyway, humidity is a big deal. So that's what I remember about that particular song. And man, I'll tell you this too, that song in particular, I was done writing songs, and I was done. Like I needed a change, and I put every amount of frustration and intensity into that song that I possibly could. And it's still to this day one of my favorite vocal performances on an album that we've done.
Lacerated is the next track, the 10th track on the record. Also working with Tony and Jasin on this one, or I'm sorry, Brad on this one. But tell me about that track.
There's a lot of things I could say about this track. Some people might call this what we say in the music business, filler.
Well, maybe it just buttoned everything up together. I like how you used that line before, because
Yeah, we'll say that it buttoned up.
All right, I would.
But a unique thing about this particular song, I remember being in Henson Studios when Barry was cutting the drums for it, and at this point in time, when we were in Henson Studios, the cool thing about Bob is he's made so many records and worked with so many record labels and what have you. So he understands the budgets and, some of the rock and roll things that you want to do when you're making a record, especially your debut album. So he was like carte blanche on everything. And we were also getting the label to like buy us a bunch of stuff. But the coolest thing, in my personal opinion, that I remember that we got on the Leave a Whisper sessions when we were in Henson Studios was Craig Rosen, who is such an important part of this band from the label side. He's the money man with Warner Music, Atlantic Electra Music, what have you. And he had to sign off on everything. Like financially, like when you would get something or you would ask for something or this and that and the other, like you could have a wish list, but it didn't necessarily mean that you would get it. And if you really, really wanted it, you had to call him, or that's what, I didn't know that that's what you had to do. So he gets submitted this stuff. And on the day we did Lacerated, I was like, I want a gong. I want a gong and I want to set it on fire when we record it in the room. So he calls me. I'm in the studio, and Jamie, the assistant, comes in, and she was like, "Brent, there's a Craig Rosen on the phone." And I said, and they always, they had phones in the studio and stuff like that. There's a Craig Rosen on the phone for you. I'm like, oh, cool. I get the phone in the studio. I'm like, what's up? And me and him had an interaction with each other and what have you. And he goes,
sold one record yet.
I know. Exactly. And dude, in the record, when you open up if you have the album and you open it up, when it goes through the thank yous, there's a very specific title next to Craig that to this day he is known for in the industry. Jamie's like, there's a Craig Rosen on the phone. I grabbed the phone and was like, what's up, Craig? And this is the first thing he says to me. He goes, a gong? So I go, yes. And he goes, a gong. And by the way, for people that don't know, gongs aren't cheap.
Yeah.
And but in the liner notes of the album, when we thank Craig, it says Craig in parentheses, a gong Rosen. That's what I remember from Lacerated.
That's funny. All right, we got a few more here, and then we got to cut you out here. But Crying Out, that's another song I thought could have been a single.
It was talked about being a single. Once again, very early on in the vocals with Bob Marlette on that one. That was one of the first ones we did. I think we did that right after Fly From the Inside. I think it was the second one I did. A little bit more loosened up, a little bit had more of a flow, with Bob and what have you. And once again, just an incredible live song too. I remember Bob saying that, like, he goes, this is another one where might not be a single, could be, but this song is going to serve you well live. And it did for a number of years.
And then the record wraps up, obviously, 45, a huge, gigantic hit. There's also, you got the bonus track on here as well. It's funny. It's so ironic. I walked in the station today, and the acoustic version of 45 is playing on the radio station. Like, seriously, it's just kind of weird how it works,
No, man, that's the universe.
That's right. So 45, I mean, a huge hit. Talk about that one.
We'll be here another hour.
Yeah, that one's tougher to talk about. I got you.
I'll try to I'll condense it. That is such an emotional song for me.
Yeah,
it really, really is. It was to everybody out there. It was the very first song that I wrote with Tony Battaglia. when I first met him. And this song, of the 20 years that we've been a band, and I look forward to the next 20 and the next 20 and however long we can go, knock on wood. But I remember that song is where we talk about in Shinedown, when we're making an album, we call it staring down the beast. And when you're staring down the beast, what the beast is the blank sheet of paper. What the beast is the blank session on a Pro Tools rig. It's, what are you going to create? What do you have to say? And I remember Tony being like, if this was your last day on earth, you know, what would you say? What would you express? What would be your mark? And you got to remember something. This is in the beginning. And we wrote 45 in literally, I'm not even kidding, we wrote it in about 30 minutes. Because I just remember him playing that part, that intro to the song. Was a very
Jasin or Tony?
Well, when we were working it out, I wrote the song with Tony. Okay. So it was me and him working it out first. Jasin played on the record, obviously.
Right.
And played it on the record. But I remember Tony presenting me the part, and it's such an iconic guitar part now. And it was like a flash. It was like a flood of inspiration, almost to the point of where, like, the song literally, like, as soon as the pattern hit me, all the lyrics came at once into my mind. And I just remember I just was writing ferociously, like, just as fast as I could go. And because it was happening in stream of consciousness, like, I wasn't, like, 90% of what you hear on that song, I wrote it all out within the first, like, 10 minutes. And didn't have necessarily what the chorus was going to be or what the melody was going to be, but I was writing the words. And then we were kind of honing it in. But that was our introduction, really, I think, to the world.
Yeah, and I love how at the end of it, you're like kind of exasperated.
Oh, so that whole vocal session was in Tony's home studio. I'll tell you something else about 45 that I remember, because we've not talked about a very, very influential and important person to which none of this would be happening right now if we hadn't found each other, and that is the illustrious Mr. Barry Kerch. And Barry Kerch, his ultimate, like, he was the 7th drummer that we auditioned.
That's right, yeah.
And the 45 that you hear on the record, the drums that you hear on the record on Leave a Whisper, that's his demo drums when he was auditioning for the band.
Oh, no kidding.
those are those drums. And so, you know, the dynamic of what that song represents and what it's about, and kind of like the folklore of the band and what have you. It's why we call it The Gift. And from that point on, every record we would do, we would always, fingers crossed, like, just give us one gift, just one gift. And we've been very, very fortunate, knock on wood, that we've had a gift on every album. And people don't know, a gift is a song that kind of comes out of nowhere, out of the blue, if you will, and it just kind of lands in your lap, and it almost writes itself.
I mean, what a great song. I mean, just, you know, what more could be said about that song? And finally, let's wrap things up here. You talked about the Van Zants earlier. Simple Man. You guys cover this song, obviously an iconic song. Some people think it's better than the original, you know, whatever the case is. But it's like, first of all, tell everybody, we got about 5 minutes left. Tell everybody about, like, how you guys figured out to do that song and the connection between Leonard Skinner and Shinedown.
I'm going to say this in the only way that I know how to. What we look at in regards to Shinedown and the song Simple Man is that it was I don't want to say that it was an accident, but it wasn't planned what happened. Like, again, Judy Van Zant housed me. For people that don't know, Jasin Todd, who was on the first two records, he was married to Melody Van Zant, which was Ronnie Van Zant's daughter. And so the reality is that the lineage between Skynyrd and Shinedown is very real. And we are very much family. And so when Judy housed me for like a year straight, I told her, I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to pay you back. I mean, but I promise you one day I'll pay you back. And I remember the very first time the band played live was at Freebird Live, which was the club that Judy and Melody owned in Jacksonville. And what I had done is I had worked up Simple Man that night, and I dedicated it to her and I sang it to her. And that was kind of my thank you in a way. And we were on the road with Three Doors Down at the time when we played that show. We had a one-off, we did it, we went back to tour. And so we were in Boston, and we had gone in for the very, very first time at a radio station there with called WAAF, and with a very, very, legendary DJ, Mistress Carey. Long story short, we got in there, and for whatever reason, she was having bands that were coming in that day and what have you, do like cover songs and what have you. And we had a cover of something else that we kind of tried to work up, and it was just a train wreck. And it was just a train wreck. And so Brad looked over at me and was like, do Simple Man. I'm like, absolutely not. I can't, because here's the thing. I didn't know if I would have remembered all the words and what have you. I like studied it the night before to give it to Judy, but they somehow got me to do it. And I was terrified, but I did it, and they recorded it. And this is in the days of MP3s, the very early days of streaming, if you will, and downloading music. Fast forward 6 weeks later, we come back to Boston and play our own show. And Mistress Carey comes in to us and she goes, I'm going to show you a number. When you all left, our phones went ballistic over what you all did with that song. So, we recorded it. There's this thing called MP3s now that we can do. And we recorded it and put it on our website. And in 6 weeks, it had been downloaded over 500,000 times. And so they showed me this. And so we went down to Florida. We cut it in Sanford, Florida. AAF, for 20 years, man, even though we had a version that we went there, recorded, and then we re-released the record, but AAF always, they just played the one from that day. But long story short, at the time, and it became a single, and at the time, Judy Van Zant owned 51% of the Lynyrd Skynyrd publishing. And I remember I looked at her and I said, I told you I'd pay you back.
And that you did. And that's how we're going to wrap this up. Brent, really just a pleasure to have, known you all these years. And thank you so much for doing this, going on track by track with Leave a Whisper. Records sold 1.5 million copies and really just kicked off an illustrious career that's continuing going and continues to get stronger, it seems like.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because of you, sir. And I will always say this about terrestrial radio. I know we live in a world right now where the consumption of music is at our fingertips and what have you, but nothing, especially when you talk about Leave a Whisper in that time frame, and what not only stations like The Riff and people like yourself that have been with us, again, it's an anomaly for 20 years. And I look forward to the next 20 and so on. But I got to give a lot of credit to terrestrial radio, specifically with this album, Leave a Whisper, because you guys and girls were you were the reason that you played the music and you presented it to your audiences. And we wouldn't be who we are today without you.
Well, I appreciate that, my friend. And thank you again so much for this. We'll see you April 3rd.
Yeah.
On that tour. But Brent, thank you so much for your time.
I love you, my man. I'll see you later.
And there you have it, the debut episode of Track by Track with Brent Smith of Shinedown talking about Leave a Whisper. Give me your feedback on my socials. I'm on Twitter and Facebook at MeltdownWRIF. You can even email me at meltdownwrif.com. And listen, follow and subscribe, because this is the first of many Track by Track episodes.